Hello, this is WD.
FM, the official Walt Disney Family Museum podcast. We're your hosts, Bri Lacini, Marketing Manager.
And Chris Mullen, Marketing Coordinator at the Walt Disney Family Museum.
Congratulations, Chris. Yay!
Thank you. I'm very excited to coordinate.
Well, welcome back to our monthly Museum Musings episode, where we keep you updated on upcoming museum happenings. Make sure you're subscribed to our podcast so you never miss an episode. Stay tuned later this month for our deep dive, where Chris and I will take a closer look at the 1940 classic Pinocchio. Each podcast is also available as a video podcast with closed captions available on every episode. Visit our YouTube channel at WD-FM Museum or read the show notes from today's podcast posted to our blog for more information.
An update on the museum galleries that detail the life of Walt Disney are still currently closed. However, the museum store and our newest exhibition, the Walt Disney Studios and World War II, is currently open Thursday through Sundays from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Visit waltdisney.org to reserve your tickets. Stay tuned for updates later this month about the main museum's reopening. And make sure you're signed up for our email newsletter coming from yours truly for museum updates, and follow us on social media at WDF Museum for all of the latest updates.
Yes. So happy that people can finally be in person at the museum. So maybe you want to pick up some, fun new Walt Disney Family Museum merchandise in our store, or just see the new Walt Disney Studios and World War II exhibition. We hope you enjoyed our last episode. That was a lot of fun to put together about that exhibition.
And I will definitely be stopping by the store to pick up one of those snazzy bomber jackets that Kent Ramsey was wearing on his interview with us last time.
Yeah, and I'm definitely going to have to pick up the Fifanella track jacket. All the Fifanella merchandise are some of my favorites. So you can visit waltdisney.org/store to pick up any of our Walt Disney Studios and World War II exhibition merchandise. Celebrate some exciting Disney dates with us on social media. Starting April 5th is Mary Costa's 91st birthday, whose voice, according to Prince Philip, is, quote, too beautiful to be real. Costa voiced Prince Aurora in the 1959 animated classic Sleeping Beauty. And on April 7th, the 1939 Ugly Duckling celebrates its 82nd anniversary. This was the only Silly Symphony short to be remade, first released in 1931, and then again 8 years later, where it would win an Academy Award.
And then on April 18th, let's get together and celebrate Disney legend Haley Mills' birthday. And on April 20th, Make Mine Music celebrates its 75th anniversary. The film, made up of 10 unique segments, was Disney's first post-war package feature and starred such talents as the Andrews sisters, Andy Russell, Dinah Shore, and Jerry Colonna.
On April 23rd is World Book Day. Walt Disney was a lifelong reader and credits E.G. Lutz's book, Animated Cartoons, with teaching him the fundamentals of animation. In addition to being a frequent guest of the Kansas City Public Library in his youth, he had extensive personal libraries, from which many of his personal books in our collection come from. Walt often gifted books, and some special ones he gifted to his daughter Diane included a first edition Christmas Stories by Charles Dickens and a complete set of Shakespeare works in miniature that we have on display in our galleries. If you were to peek open any of those miniature books, they do have all of the full plays. You gotta get out your magnifying glass for that one. Walt would adapt some of his daughter's favorite stories into films, including Bambi, Johnny Tremaine, Winnie the Pooh, and Mary Poppins, just to name a few. And one of my favorite audio clips in our galleries is of Walt talking about how when his daughter saw Bambi for the first time, she was not pleased with the adaptation, and especially about the death of Bambi's mother. Walt retold the story saying, quote, "She said to me, 'Daddy, why did you have to kill Bambi's mother?' And I said, 'Well, it was in the book, dear.' She said, 'There were plenty of things in that book that you changed. Why couldn't you have changed that?' She had me there," end quote. In honor of World Book Day, why don't we mention some of our favorite Disney books? Chris, you go first.
Absolutely. Well, in less traumatizing books, we have a book that I want to highlight, which is Disney's Land, Walt Disney and the Invention of the Amusement Park That Changed the World by Richard Snow. I received it as a gift before it appeared on the shelves in the museum store, still available now. In Disney's Land, Snow brilliantly presents the entire spectacular story, a wild ride from vision to realization, and an epic of innovation and error that reflects the uniqueness of the man determined to build the happiest place on earth, Walt Disney. One of my favorite things about this book is the examination of several of the key players involved in Disneyland's launch. It's easy to think of Walt himself as being the person most responsible for Disneyland opening where and how it did, but to do so would be to discount the many incredible stories from people such as Harrison Buzz Price, credited by D23 as a research economist, who advised Walt on the various factors that made Anaheim the perfect location for his park. And he would stay on as an advisor, assisting in the 1964-65 New York World's Fair, California Institute of the Arts, Walt Disney World Resort, and Tokyo Disneyland, among others. A true Disney legend in every way.
Well, that's such a great recommendation. I actually have not read this book, so I'm going to have to pick it up in our store. That really seems like an interesting look at the Imagineers and that worked on Disneyland. So can't wait to check that one out. Chris, probably not to your surprise, my favorite Disney history book is Ink and Paint, The Women of Walt Disney's Animation by historian Mindy Johnson. I cite it all the time when we're doing any of our scripts or resources because I just love it so much. It highlights and profiles some of the wonderful women who contributed to animation, not just in the ink and paint department, though she does highlight some of the amazing innovations that these women did. Whenever I do any research, I grab that book and Walt Disney, An American Original by Bob Thomas. Those are two hand-in-hand books, and I like how they kind of coincide together, where in the Bob Thomas book, some information about these women or about the roles that these women did isn't included. You have a great updated resource for that in Ink and Paint, The Women of Walt Disney's Animation. And I just really love how this book adds the history of the Disney studios and is part of history that wasn't as researched as kind of the men's contributions to animation. And women contributed so much, and I'm so glad that this book highlights all their amazing work.
Totally. And it also goes to show that Disney history is ever evolving. There are always more stories being added in. The Bob Thomas book is decades old and it's been updated. But from that core story, going from Walt's earliest beginnings through the end of his life, there's just so much story that's out there that can be added in. The museum galleries does a little bit of that. When we do special exhibitions, we try to do that as well. Just adding more and more of these other stories that all contribute to the whole, that all contribute to Walt's legacy. So I think you can't go wrong with any of these books and the stories that they share.
Yeah, just adding a little bit more color.
Right. And in some cases, colorful paint.
Exactly.
Well, this month we're celebrating Earth Day with our virtual special exhibition, Conserving the Magic of Our Planet, a virtual community art exhibition. That is going to be a whole lot of fun to see. You and I have gotten sneak peeks at some of the artworks that have been submitted, and they are just so far reaching, all the different themes of conservation and protecting our environment. A lot of people got really, really creative with it, and I think it's going to be a really fun time for folks out there to see what we've been seeing.
Yeah, I've been enjoying so much of our community art exhibitions, kind of engaging with people around the world and having them contribute to the museum in these exhibitions. So it's just really cool to have your artwork up in the Diane Disney Miller exhibition hall. So it's been such a joy to see everyone take in each prompt and kind of see what they could do with their own artistic abilities.
We wanted to share some of Walt's connections to conservation during his lifetime. Mineral King is a topic that comes to my mind. Announced December 18, 1965, the U.S. Forest Service awarded the right to develop the Mineral King area of Sequoia National Forest to Walt Disney Productions. And the Mineral King project is really one of the great what-ifs that emerged from Walt's passing. It was announced December 18, 1965, when the U.S. Forest Service awarded the right to develop the Mineral King area of what's now Sequoia National Forest to Walt Disney Productions. Remember, at the very same time, Walt Disney Productions was deep into development on their Florida project, which was at that time dubbed Disney World, later to become Walt Disney World Resort under Roy's supervision. On December 15th, of course, as we all know, 1966, Walt Disney passed away. And in the following decade, the Imagineers at WED Enterprises refined their plans and ran into some legal challenges by environmental groups. In 1977, the U.S. Forest Service attempted to revive the resort plan, but by then, Walt Disney Productions had walked away from the Mineral King environmental fight in favor of an entirely different ski resort location on private land at Independence Lake, north of Lake Tahoe. In 1978, Congress removed the 16,200 acres of Mineral King from the National Forest and annexed it to Sequoia National Park. The bill even had language prohibiting downhill ski facilities at Mineral King to show just how dead the ski resort project was at that point. A favorite piece of trivia among Disney Parks fans is how the Country Bear Jamboree attraction was originally designed for Mineral King. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that Mineral King would have had a theme park. The audio animatronics bears were planned as entertainers for one of the restaurants. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, I had no idea. I definitely have a lot more to learn about Mineral King because it's such an interesting part of Walt's history and kind of the last plans that one of the last projects that Walt was working on amongst many others.
True, and it showed that without Walt at the helm, they had to kind of choose the fights that they wanted, the projects that they wanted to fight for. Obviously, they were well in on their Florida plans, and with an eye out towards where else they might want to expand in the future. But Mineral King was definitely one of those first projects after Walt passed away that didn't come to fruition as anyone had seen it, but is just another part of that legacy of Walt Disney going forward.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I wanted to highlight the True Life Adventure series. Walt was consistently ahead of his time, and he understood the importance of nature and educating the public about the many amazing creatures we share the planet with. He was the first to capture an audience's attention by pairing wildlife film footage with captivating storytelling with his True Life Adventure series. They were shown in public schools for decades, and judging by correspondence that is in the Walt Disney archives, many young people went into the Forestry Service and related fields due to the influence of these films. Walt was worried about the vanishing frontier even in the 50s and asked the husband and wife team, Alfred and Alma Malott, to go capture the last remaining wilderness, Alaska, on film to attempt to capture the disappearing outpost of civilization. The outcome of this film expedition was the first in the series, Seal Island. Here are some thoughts from Walt about that series. Quote, "Our films have provided thrilling entertainment of educational quality and have played a major part in the worldwide increase in appreciation and understanding of nature. These films have demonstrated that facts can be as fascinating as fiction, truth as beguiling as myth, and have opened the eyes of young and old to the beauties of the outdoor world and arouse their desire to conserve priceless natural assets." End quote.
Our newest community art exhibition, Conserving the Magic of Our Planet, will debut on Earth Day, Thursday, April 22nd, 2021. Adult and teen artists from around the world were invited to submit artwork inspired by Walt's passion for stories based on our natural environment and protection of our planet. Opening ceremony and tour of the exhibition on Earth Day will debut on our Facebook and YouTube channels. Throughout the week, stay tuned for special presentations on our social channels celebrating Earth Day activities.
Now for our program roundup. On April 17th, we have a special member-only Oscar program with Ron Diamond. Join us as Ron Diamond, executive producer of Acme Filmworks, hosts the annual Academy Award-nominated Animated Short Film Showcase. Watch a screening of this year's Best Animated Short Film nominees and hear stories from some of the talented artists behind these spectacular movies. If you're not a member, visit waltdisney.org/membership to sign up and get access to the special program, as well as our members-only portal with past Happily Ever After Hours episodes and select past virtual programs.
That's going to be a really great time. Every time Ron puts on this Oscar program, we get people asking for it to come back the next year. So this one, I'm sure, is going to be very much the same. On April 20th, join best-selling author Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara for a virtual storytime of Little People, Big Dreams, Earth Heroes. Hear the stories of 3 environmental heroes, Jane Goodall, Greta Thunberg, and David Attenborough, and how they pursued their dreams to help conserve the natural world. This program is free. Sign up is required. Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara is a writer and creative director in search of new concepts for children's books. Even if you aren't a little one, this program is great for anyone who is interested in a career in children's books.
On April 22nd, we are celebrating Earth Day with nature artist John Muir-Laws in a virtual workshop. In this fun and interactive workshop, learn how to block in the basic shapes, foreshorten flowers, and use watercolor or colored pencils to bring out the beauty in your own nature journal. A list of materials needed for this workshop will be emailed out to attendees the week of the event. This program is free for our members and $5 for non-members.
And that Earth Day workshop sounds like a whole lot of fun to just get out there and start your own nature journal to see what's around you. And for folks who are interested in learning a little bit more about other animation related art forms, select summer classes are still available for a variety of age ranges. We have classes on experimental animation, paper and texture, storyboarding versus comics, making comics, from head to toe character design, and poetry in animation. Some of our other sold out classes also have wait lists, so check those out to see how you can get on the wait list for those if you're interested. These multi-week virtual classes are perfect for students interested in art and animation. Visit waltdisney.org/classes for a full list of current offerings. Now we would like to welcome to the podcast Director of Education, Travis Lacina. Travis, welcome to the show.
Oh my goodness. Thank you both. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for asking me on too. I love what you both are doing with the podcast also. Like I'm listening to all of them and really getting a kick out of it to hear everybody's voices and even just the historical aspects of the museum and sort of what goes into what we're putting into exhibitions or anything like that. So keep doing it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, let's just get right into it. How long have you been in your role as Director of Education at the Walt Disney Family Museum, and what does your role consist of?
Yeah, I have. Well, so I've been at the museum actually since 2014. I started part-time. I was working at a progressive education school in Menlo Park, full-time at that point. And then I came on full-time at the museum in 2015. As far as being director of education, I took on that role in the second half of 2019. The role itself is to oversee the departments within education, that being the studio team who teaches the classes and workshops that we have during the week or the weekends, to our guests and our students, sometimes brand new, sometimes continuing, and then to also oversee the school and outreach team who work with our individual teachers and school groups to offer them workshops connected to the idea of classroom learning and Common Core. From there, it's really important that we all get together and plan and implement a variety of educational offerings that pull from Walt's legacy to the history of animation to the animation industry and those standards, but also that we're bringing something that's uniquely ours to everything that we're doing. Uh, the role of the job, I feel, is also sometimes the goal of the job, which is to help individuals understand that they can follow their passion, whatever that is, whether they're talking about art and animation. They also can sort of come in here and discover what works for them within that world so that they can decide what is the best path for them, whether this is a career, whether this is something that they want to continue with their own education. And so the goal here is also to talk about these things and maintain a voice and consistency in not just what we teach, but how we teach these things. our goal has always been to meet students where they are and to see them as individuals so that we can get to know not just what their personal goals are for themselves, but whether or not they want more from this, as well as who they are as an individual and what they're into, what they're coming for, where they're coming from, whether that's even California or somewhere out of state or another country.
Kind of following up on that, you've been with the museum for so long and really establishing all of these classes and figuring out all the different kind of pathways for students of all ages. How has that been kind of growing up with some of these kids and seeing them now go into the world, into the animation industry?
I mean, it's fantastic. It's phenomenal. It's, for the kids, it's sort of like they feel like our kids. They feel a little bit like family, especially when you see some of these students who come in at 9 years old and then are going through high school and then going to college. We have a few students now at different art and animation schools, such as Cal Arts or NYU or Sheridan, even San Francisco State. And to see that happen is to see them realize what their dreams are and the possibilities. For myself and many of the team as well, when we were younger, we didn't really even understand that this was a job, that you could do something like this. And what we also didn't realize is what we're trying to teach to our students now, in that there are so many paths within this industry. You tend to think of, oh, if you're into animation, you love animating, you love making a character move, you love drawing that character, you all of that. And there are so many paths. You can be the person who's animating the characters or even objects. You can animate effects. You can also work in storytelling and storyboarding. You can be somebody that is in just the technical side of things with lighting or even textures. You can get into video games. So to see them go into that and to say, this is what I want to do, this is where I want to go with it, and this is how I've had something that, quite frankly, for me, I'm trying to give them, and so is the rest of the team, something that we never had, not just in terms of advice, but equipment, in terms of sort of the insight, in terms of the technology, so that they can say, yeah, I can actually do this too. And the best part about animation is that you get out of it what you put into it. It's like anything else. It's just this slow motion form of movie making, essentially. And so if you have the patience for that and you dive into it, it comes back, and we get students who say, I got into this school, or I got into this program, or I'm interning here. And, we just go, perfect, keep going, follow it. And that's what we want to do, is keep our students engaged. And hopefully, as we've seen, most of our students are kind of like sponges in that they want to be learning more. They're not there to feed their ego. They're there to learn about this and to continue to grow, which I think helps them get into these programs because they stay engaged, they stay curious, and they stay hungry for it. Not for their name at the top. Not that some of them wouldn't want to be, the director or something like that. It's that they really want the educational piece and say, hey, I know this, but I don't know everything, teach me more.
Totally. And it's so cool, as you said, to be able to take a student, a young mind from the very beginning, teaching them the basics and then watching them flourish into their own art style or into their own path, wherever animation takes them. Maybe not necessarily in the industry of animation, but how that opens up a whole new set of doors for them. And speaking of other doors, you mentioned not just within here in state, but that the education department programs have expanded out of state and even out of the country. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, sure. So when we were open prior to the pandemic, we could have students that would come in from the Bay Area and take our classes, and then we would also see students that were coming from Southern California and then from out of state, even places like Texas or Florida. We were seeing some students from Canada come in. We had one student who came from Russia who actually wanted to take one of our summer classes, which was phenomenal. And she went back home and kind of presented about her experience to this huge audience. at 12 years old, which I was like, I would have been terrified to do that at her age. Probably now as well. Um, but within our virtual offerings, we've been able to shift the focus and say, okay, we all need to sort of now either be at home or wherever our workstation is, and how do we create a seamless situation or environment that still feels like you're in the classroom and still feels like you're engaging. And with working on Zoom, working with any kind of virtual programming, we've been able to now get a number of regular students and families who are coming in from across the United States and from outside, who can click into our Saturday studio series or our pop-up studios or even some of our after school classes where they normally couldn't do that. You normally can't come from Florida for a 2-hour class every week in San Francisco. So we've been really lucky in that respect that we've been able to get those families and those students to come in. And we want to be able to continue that once we actually get back to reopening and staying inside the museum, and so that we can still offer a virtual setting for those that can't be here so that we can connect with everybody.
Yeah, that's definitely been a huge kind of pivot point for all areas of the museum and cultural institutions around the world. Was that kind of the biggest challenge, was kind of adapting to being online, or, kind of what was some of the difficulties of adapting our really hands-on education and outreach program?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's for all of us, it tends to be the same sort of things, right? The whole, hey, you're on mute. We can't see you right now. I can't log in for whatever reason, or I'm running a presentation and nobody can see it. There are all of those sort of technical challenges. So on one hand, we were really fortunate because we have been running a distance learning program for about 5 years now with a prep school in New Hampshire called New Hampton. And they are a boarding school, it's a high school. And we've been teaching animation to them over sort of a virtual experience, virtual learning setting for a number of years. So we knew that side of it already. We were basically these giant heads in their classroom as they're in a classroom learning from us, and they're learning animation and we're sharing our screen and they have assignments. So we understood that part of it. What we had to learn was right when we closed down in March of 2020 was, okay, we need to stop what we had planned and figure out what our summer classes are going to look like, because they are all going to shift to virtual. And so how do you go from teaching a 1 to 2 hour class or workshop to a 6 hour class or workshop that stays engaging, that gets the equipment to the students, that still has everything that you wanted to have in the classroom, but over a camera and the internet? And so the challenge there was to shift all of that so that, again, students really felt like they were part of the group. I think that's one of the things in a virtual setting, is that you can be on with everyone and engaged, or you're able to really just almost be anonymous and just a black screen with your name, or not even seen at all. And these classes are all about these students learning from each other. It's about getting them into their projects. It's about having them present their ideas, offer up suggestions, offer insight in things that we watch or look at. And so how do you do that when they're at home and all they're seeing are these little boxes around? So that was the biggest challenge. I think what has been great is that kids in particular have adapted pretty well to that just with their schooling. So we got them in pretty early and had some really great summer classes in that respect, because these students were coming in and being able to look down and draw while something was going on and not be called on it like they needed to look up. And so they had their space, they had the things around them, they had their equipment, and they felt comfortable enough to sort of share, but also listen to everyone else.
For sure. And perhaps another challenge presented by going virtual is that folks might not know exactly what they're getting into just based off of the description of the class or workshop. And, we have such a variety of educational offerings. Can you talk a little bit about the differences between our pop up studio workshops, studio series workshops, and our classes?
Oh yeah, of course. I think the first thing is to look at the fact that we have classes and workshops. And sometimes people say, well, I'm not really sure how to differentiate the two. And what we always say is that a workshop is something that you can take once and you could take never again, which is something you can do with a class. It's that a workshop says, hey, you could jump in now and come in again 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years later. And each piece of education that's being taught there may reference to something else. However, it's very much its own thing, so that you can jump in right there. You can learn about that topic, that skill, that technique, and take that and move forward with it. There's no expectation that you need to have taken a previous workshop to jump into another workshop. On the class side, it is very much that we set up 8 weeks. Students come in, they learn a concept that builds to the next concept. They reference back to what they've learned and understand why it is that they're learning, so that you can move to the next piece, so that then they can either finish off with all of these skills or that they can create a project of their own. And when we've done that in the workshop side of things, the fact that we have our pop-up studios and our studio series, these are kind of low barrier of entry. I know that as a younger person, I would have been terrified to come into a room and animate and worry that somebody would call me on what I'm doing or highlight it in some way. And what we want to do is say, hey, this is for those of you that are interested in these elements. Come in. It's very low risk. It's very much that you can never have done any animation in a studio series. You can work with us for 90 minutes. We give you a presentation and then we demonstrate, and you can just simply follow along. And at the end of an hour and a half, you have a short animated thing like animating eating or animating some kind of emotion. On the pop-up studio side, it's one of our free educational offerings. And this very much taps into the art and animation and Walt's legacy and gets into a different sort of creative realm. Sometimes there are animation projects in there. We've had a multi-plane animation pop-up studio, which was phenomenal a few years ago. But it's things like learning how to build a gondola out of cardboard and understanding the construction of that, understanding the measurements and the cutting and some of the fun techniques of how you put it together rather than just saying, hey, I have a box and I've cut a window in the side. It's looking at the engineering of that. We've done things like automatons where they've had little cranks and rubber bands and strings and things have been moving. We've looked at concept art and poster design. So that's how those are a little bit different from one another. Studio series tends to just be animation with sometimes something else sprinkled in, and pop-up studios tend to be sort of those other projects and kind of like the research and development side. Our classes focus on anything from a digital animation class to foundation drawing with charcoal to character design or cartooning or comics. And we have students come in and they learn about what the history is, why things are done the way that they're done, and then are given assignments and activities to create themselves. And that's where we sort of get to see these people coming back and learning and really enjoying what they bring out of it.
Yeah, I feel like there really is something for everyone. We do have obviously a strong focus on animation, but through other various workshops, anybody who feels artistic can kind of really find a home within our programming, which is really special. And even within our summer and after school classes, those have been a cornerstone of our education department programming for so long. What makes these classes unique for students looking to kind of hone their skills?
With after school animation, that's been going on for about 6 years now, and it takes place usually on Wednesdays. It's a 2-hour class from 4 to 6 p.m. And students will come in and first learn the basics of what animation is. They will understand how to work on paper and hand draw, or they'll work with paper cutouts and stop motion. And we start with actual physics of animation. So we have things like balls bouncing and things falling over. And we move into some character animation while still using some basic shapes so that all those students learn how the process of animation goes, and that animation isn't just about having a pretty picture. It's also about the fundamentals underneath that make that thing move. We always say that you can have a pretty picture and some animation that isn't quite up to par. You can have some animation that's gorgeous and then maybe some artwork that some people may say isn't great. That's a little more subjective. I think we all love different types of animation and artists. Hopefully you're having both, but you're also expressing yourself in both ways. So they can gain those skills. In after school animation, they can also come back as continuing students and still learn concepts and techniques that we teach, but they also get a chance to develop their own project. With our summer classes, those are a little bit different in that they are these 2-week intensives where students join us from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., Monday through Friday for 2 weeks. And what we do is we give them anything from here's experimental animation to here is storyboarding to here is world building to comics to character design. And we give them the history of that. We look at all sorts of examples. We give them challenges to push themselves. We give them the room to be creative without being judged, because that's an important piece too. And over the first week, by the time you get to Wednesday, you feel like you've been with each other for, months at that point, because you're just diving into the art so deeply. And by the second week, all of our students are working on some project that they have pitched to the group, that they have received feedback or questions on. And then they come in and it's like a working studio. They show up and they almost don't even say hello to us, and they're just kind of working. And then we do individual check-ins and we say, okay, how is it that you can make this the best that you can make it? And I think that's part of our philosophy. We say that to everyone, which is if it's a film, let's say, we're not trying to make our film through the students. We want to help the student make the best film or project that they can make. And that's bringing in the industry standards, knowing where it's come from, why something is the way that it is, so that they can break those rules if they need to and tell us something new. The very favorite part about classes for me is that I will always get something from each class. And maybe it sort of seems cliche to say it, but it's you have conversations and students will bring things up that you've never thought about and I've never thought about. And I will say, whoa, that's a totally new perspective or new idea or new thought. And I love that. And then it becomes a conversation and it isn't just a top-down teaching thing. We're trying to be teachers, not instructors, not saying do it this way. We're trying to say, how can we lead you? And then you can build off of that. So our classes always give us more of an intimate setting with how we get to know each other. And the summer classes in particular, these 2 weeks are, I would have killed for something like this. And that's our thing too, is we just want to give them something again that we've never had.
Totally. I mean, for my own personal development, I don't consider myself a particularly good artist, but when I was growing up, I took a comics class over the summer. Before I found the museum, I found a comics class on my own, and just coming in from a complete beginner, and the entire journey that I went on as an artist and as a storyteller, I felt like that was a really important development for me to have taken that. And I'm sure that the virtual summer classes that we have coming up are offering those same opportunities to students all around. So if any of our guests are listening that are interested in these virtual summer classes, go to our website, take a look. We have all of them listed, even the ones that are sold out. There are wait lists for, and we have the studio team's email to inquire about getting on the wait list. So one last question before we let you go. This is one that we like to ask all of our guests on this program. What is your favorite artifact in the museum?
Oh man, I'm sure my first answer is probably everybody's answer, which is it's just incredibly hard to pick something like that. It's going through all of these treasures and this history and then saying pick one of those. I'll say here, I'll kind of cheat a little bit and I'll give you kind of 3 answers real quick. So on one side, the multiplane itself is phenomenal. I see that as, just as somebody who's into animation and art and kind of geeking out on that stuff, a tool like that actually said, let's create layers that can move up and down and side to side to give depth and distance into a 2D form is just so much fun and so amazing when you kind of get into that and you start to look at the overlap and the genius that was going on to create something like that and to build off of what there was in animation history as far as how people had played with that before, but to reinvent it in the multiplane camera, that really stands out to me. There's a piece of art in particular that I always go to. It's not always on display. It's this piece of Pinocchio, almost kind of concept art of Geppetto bringing Pinocchio out of the waves, and it's a little bit dark and grim in some ways. It's just kind of a beautiful piece to know that there were these artists that touched these pieces of paper that's some of them are almost 100 years old at this point is mind-blowing. And what it does is it tells a lot about what Pinocchio was, but also what Walt was trying to do with this art form, which was not just to say it's for everyone, so therefore it's just family friendly. It was that he wasn't afraid to be funny and to be sad and to talk about life and to talk about death, and to really say that Pinocchio is not just about being a real boy, but it's about living, and how that comes through, that these artists were to say, look, I have one image that conveys so much to you just emotionally, just always inspires me. The last little piece on my cheat here is that there's some storyboards. I won't say where exactly, but towards the end of the museum, and they're framed right now. But you can actually see, this is the animation geeky side of me, in that in the corners of some of them they have these little pinholes from like thumbtacks. And some of them have more holes than others. And what you can tell by that is that somebody was pinning them up and then pulling them down and either redrawing or moving them around. And to know something like that was put up and put down and not scrapped, but actually sort of played with, is again like an unspoken part of this art form, which is saying there are always hands that are touching it, and this stuff didn't exist until somebody created it. Um, Even if that's live action, somebody had to plan it this way. So those are my answers. That's where I go. And the museum as a whole is just an inspiration, and as you both know, just a place to go into to think and get clarity and keep you going and motivated.
This is the exact reason why we love talking to people in different departments, because I have never noticed that before. All the different
Same.
pinholes, I'm going to have to look it up. But of course, talking to someone who's into animation, hearing your insights into these wonderful and beautiful artifacts is so amazing. So thank you so much, Travis, for joining us on WDFM and sharing so much about the wonderful education and animation programs we have going on at the Walt Disney Family Museum.
Oh my goodness. Thank you both. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to WD-FM, the official Walt Disney Family Museum podcast. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Email us questions or comments at podcast@wdfmuseum.org.
Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at WDF Museum for all the latest updates.
From Bri and I, conserve the magic of our planet and keep moving forward.